So I've been on the OmniPod5 for about 6 months now, and I'm a very active person. I do a lot of weight training, I do cardio, I box, and I'm also just generally active. Part of my job as an occupational therapist is to be physically active and working with people. So I'm always moving around. So the point is, I've learned a lot about how to manage and maintain stable blood sugars when I'm being active. And the activity mode in OmniPod5 has been very helpful for that. So I wanted to talk briefly about that, along with just general things that I do dietary and planning wise to make me able to kind of continue to be as active as I'd like to be. So the first thing is activity mode itself. So it's basically just a setting. Again, I'm no expert. This is just how I think what I've experienced and what I've sort of come across on the internet researching it. So activity mode is just going to prevent the OmniPod5 from giving you automated corrections if you're above a certain value. So when you activate activity mode, it's essentially going to let your blood sugars drift up to the 150 range before it starts automatically correcting, which is really nice because all things being equal, my Omnipod is set to correct at 110. So if I didn't turn it on, as soon as I get above 110, it's going to start giving me those micro corrections, which it's not a huge deal, but I don't want any extra insulin in my system when I go to work out, other than the stuff that I already have from, let's say, a meal a couple of hours before. So activity mode is very helpful in that respect. It's also important to consider the fact that you do it long enough before you start engaging in an activity. Because if I turn on activity mode right now and I walk out the door, there's still all those micro corrections that would have been in my system up until that point. So you want to give it enough time. Different for everybody, different on different days. But I tend to give it 30 to 45 minutes before I go to do something. And I've had pretty good success with that. Now, that's not going to fix your issue. You're not going to be able to just go do whatever you want and not have to worry about a low blood sugar because activity mode is on. You certainly have to consider, obviously, where your number is at before you begin the activity, what kind of food you've eaten throughout the course of the day, how active you've already been or not been in that day, what was your sleep like the night before, because all this stuff really impacts your insulin sensitivity and even the weather. There's so many variables that are going to influence what your blood sugar does when you go to do a different thing. So you definitely don't want to rely completely on activity mode, but it's an important piece of clearing out some of that excess insulin that might cause you, challenges that you're not thinking of directly because they're not immediately related to food. So that's one thing. In terms of the exercise itself, so the different types of exercise affect everyone differently. For me, what happens is, so there's cardiovascular exercise, which is like, running or going on a elliptical machine or doing sort of like sustained lower intensity activities. A lot of times, well, and for me too, that's going to pretty consistently lower my blood sugar. Weight training is the opposite. It's an anaerobic, so no oxygen required sort of activity. And for some people, that'll actually raise their blood sugar. Like strength training will sometimes make people's blood sugar skyrocket and actually have to take insulin to prevent that. For me, I don't get that. So my blood sugar either stays the same or it comes down slowly. So it'll come down much faster when I'm doing cardio exercise and much more slowly when I'm doing strength training. So I take that into account when I decide on where I'm going to work out or like what order I'm going to do things in or what a given workout's going to include for that day. Now, in my case, what I was doing, I made some changes recently that have really helped. And I'll just relay them here because they may be helpful for other people to consider. So previously I had been having a big snack, let's say glucose tablets and some carbs. Usually complex carbs they're going to last longer. So I like to mix those in with the fast acting glucose tablets. So I'll have a few glucose tablets and then I'll have something like a yogurt with granola before I go to work out. Because I find that if there's no meal that includes complex carbs along with maybe some fat and protein, that the glucose tablets will cause a spike in the short term, but I'll burn through it so fast that I'll really be coming down quickly again. So that's sort of my pre-workout meal. And then I try to start my workout when I'm around, 140 or 150. I really don't like to be much lower than that because I do work out pretty intensely and it comes down quickly. And so I don't want to have to instantly take a break and start having glucose tablet during the workout. So anyway, that's my kind of plan before I go to work out. Now, what I had been doing was starting with weight training and then doing cardio after that. The problem was I was eating all these carbs before I worked out, putting on activity mode because I was afraid of going low. But then the slower pace of the weight training workout that I was starting with was not really bringing the blood sugar down very quickly as I would expect it to. And so the end result was that as I'm trying to focus on my strength training workout, I'm just seeing my blood sugar skyrocket. You know, it's going to 170, 180, 190, sometimes 200. And rather than continuing my workout as I would like to, I end up having to actually almost turn it into a cardio workout because I'm trying to maintain the blood sugars in a reasonable range while also lifting, which is not what I want to do. So I end up taking very short breaks between sets, doing exercises that are like just not the sort of exercises I would like to do when I'm trying to, you know, gain muscle and strength. So I had to like adjust my workout so much just to prevent that blood sugar spike. And then by the time I would get it under control, I would start my cardio and I'd be exhausted. And then it would come down really, really quickly because I had at that point burned through everything that I had eaten beforehand. So I was doing that for a while. I don't really know why, but eventually I changed to reverse that order and it's been much more effective for me. So now what I do is I have, you know, a mixture of glucose tablets and some complex carbs with some fats and protein before I go to work out. But now my workout actually starts with the cardio. I find that like, you know, the push up from food balances out almost perfectly with like the pull down from the cardio. And so I can end up keeping sort of an even line at 140 or 150 through, let's say, a half an hour or a 35-minute cardio workout. And then it slowly starts to drift down after cardio, which is not bad because my strength training workout, which I do afterwards now, doesn't pull it down as fast as the cardio would have previously. So for me, after kind of some trial and error, I now do, you know, a mixture of that snack that I mentioned before I work out along with activity mode. Then I start with cardio just to kind of counteract the effect of all of the food and the carbs that I've eaten beforehand with the pull down of the cardio itself. And then I do the weight training. And so that's been really, really helpful and effective for me. As I mentioned, I always, there's a ton of variables that can affect how you respond that day versus other days. I notice, for example, like if I'm stressed, you know, my blood sugar is going to go even higher than it would normally. Of course, if there's extra insulin on board from a meal that I've had a few hours before I work out, that's going to have the most significant impact. With me, I try to exercise at a consistent time every day, and I try to eat every time at the same day. So that hasn't been too much of an issue, but that's if you are experiencing, you know, significant drops in blood sugar when you start to work out, no matter how much you eat beforehand or how often you use activity mode, I think the very first thing to look at is how much insulin is on board from a meal that you had. So that kind of goes without saying. You got to get that one under control, make sure that there's not too much in your system that would cause you to come down quickly. Now, for me, I try not to work out ever with anything more than like 1 unit on board. I'm comfortable with like, you know, 0.5 or 0.75 units on board or something like that. But anything more than that, by the time I even walk into the door of the gym, I'm going to be tanking. So I definitely want to, you know, that's the very first thing. But other than that, I would take some of this advice in terms of having a mixture of simple and complex carbs before you eat or before you work out, using activity mode, understanding how the food is impacting you versus how the exercise that you're doing is impacting you. I think it's also important to have a source of fast-acting sugars with you when you go to do those things. For me, I always have a ton of glucose tablets in my pocket, and I just take them as I need them because I'm always monitoring on my watch as I work out. So yeah, so I think that's the main thing. Like I said, if you're trying to build sort of like a routine around this so that you have a good idea of how different things affect you, try to consider all of the variables that are at play and maybe just eliminate as many as you can. So for example, try to eat consistently, eat a consistent range of things at the same times over the course of the testing period that you're doing. Try to get the same amount of sleep, evaluate like what your stress levels are or like what the weather's like, or just all of these other things that could impact you so that if things don't go as expected, you can start to look at your day and the experience to figure out, okay, what could have caused it to be different today than it was the other day, and that's not to also discount things like, your insulin site placement, your Omnipod site placement, or, how long into that 3 days of wearing it are you, because it's going to be more or less effective depending on that, or if you have it in a good spot with good absorption. So there's so many variables, but you do want to get the basics down pat. You want to understand how the food impacts you, whether it's a fast acting carb or like a complex carb. You want to understand the type of exercise you're going to do. And you want to understand like how you typically respond to those exercises so that you have a plan to manage them. So kind of all over the place here, but ultimately like activity mode is just one piece of your overall plan of how you account for the things that you're going to do throughout the course of the day to keep a stable blood sugar. And yeah, I've had pretty good success with it. There's certainly days that I'm more or less sensitive to insulin and I make adjustments, or I just don't do things certain days. But overall, I've been able to be extremely active and really not stop doing anything that I was beforehand with the Omnipod. The only other, I guess, thing that I mentioned up front is that I also do like a boxing workout, and that's maybe an interesting one because it's kind of a mixture of strength training and cardio. It's really fast paced. You're physically completely exhausted, and you're also stressed when you're sparring with somebody. The other interesting thing about that experience is that I don't have my watch on. I don't have my phone, so it's a little scary because I don't know what my blood sugar is during every 5 minutes. So typically what I do there is I put it in activity mode well in advance, and then I have to work on this plan, but I'll typically take just so much sugar that there's no way I'm going to go low. Like if I normally have 3 to 6 glucose tablets before a regular workout, I have maybe 10 or even 12 sometimes before I do a boxing workout, along with some complex carbs too. And it's funny because what I've seen is that with the workout that intense, there's really no amount of sugar that I can take beforehand that's going to bring me to some dangerously high range and keep me there. The most I've ever seen myself even get up to is like 160. And that's just with a crazy amount of sugar. And it's simply because the workout is so intense and it starts right away for an hour straight that, I'd rather err on the side of being too high than too low. So that's just, I don't know too many other parallels for that. Maybe it would be, if you or your kids or somebody is playing a sport and they don't actually have access to their technology for that period of time, I would say it's probably safer to veer on the side of being too high. But again, start to get used to the different types of exercise and understand how they affect you or whoever it is that you're helping to manage, so that when they go to do these things, they have a better sort of framework to work from. So anyway, I hope that's kind of helpful. And yeah, I'll kind of come up with maybe a more structured version of this in the future. But for now, I just wanted to get some of these ideas out there in case they helped anybody.